Generation Z gets written off as dramatic all the time. You've probably heard the stereotypes, right? That they're too anxious, maybe a bit too soft, or just needlessly paranoid. But honestly, if you actually take a step back and examine the data, a completely different picture emerges. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into the very real, very structural, and frankly impossible to ignore shifts that are defining the modern young adult experience. Because our main thesis today is pretty simple. Gen Z's anxiety, it isn't random. It's actually a completely logical reaction to an unprecedented series of institutional and economic shifts.
There's a quote from the data that really hits the nail on the head. It says, "These aren't imaginary fears. They're just a logical reaction to the world we were handed." When you really break down the specific environment they're stepping into, you start to realize they are literally the first generation to grow up watching everything get documented, priced out, automated, and judged in real time. So we're going to take a completely objective look at the facts today to understand exactly why this environment is generating such a profound level of generational dread.
So, here is our roadmap for the explainer. We're going to systematically deconstruct this anxiety across 5 main pillars: unreachable housing, the loneliest generation, the permanent record, algorithmic beauty, and finally, the AI threat. Let's just jump right in. All right, pillar number 1, unreachable housing and the modern economy. For previous generations, there was almost always this buy cheap early phase of life. But today, housing prices have completely disconnected from wages. And it's created this intense level of pessimism. Get this. According to recent survey data, a staggering 21% of respondents believe that World War II happening in the next 5 years is actually more likely than them buying a home. And nearly the exact same share believe they're more likely to win the lottery in that time frame. So you have young adults entering the workforce right now who fundamentally, truly do not believe that achieving basic housing stability is even mathematically possible for them. To really wrap our heads around why they feel this way, we have to look at the structural reality. The National Association of Realtors found that in 2025, the median age of a first-time homebuyer in the U.S. hit a record high of 40 years old. That's up from 38 just the year prior. So imagine, you just turned 19 in 2025. Your paycheck from when you were 18 hasn't really jumped much, you're still on an entry-level salary, and rent is basically devouring half of it. But in just that one single year of aging, the barrier to buying a home effectively rose by about 5%. The housing market is cranking up in difficulty way faster than a young worker can possibly scale their wages. And here's the kicker, doing everything right simply isn't enough anymore. Young adults aren't just competing with other first-time buyers, they're literally bidding against corporations and investors who pay in cash and don't care at all about interest rates. Meanwhile, rent has transformed from this temporary stepping stone into a permanent drain on their income, making saving for a down payment nearly impossible. And what about that classic advice to just move somewhere cheaper? Well, because modern jobs are heavily concentrated in expensive cities, moving often means sacrificing your career opportunities entirely. So they're stuck. They have to choose between day-to-day financial survival right now or this elusive dream of long-term stability later. Moving on to pillar number 2, the loneliest generation. Let's talk about social isolation. Now, there is a massive institutional paradox here. Gen Z is supposedly the most digitally connected generation in human history, right? Yet the numbers are incredibly stark. Around 70% report feeling lonely or socially isolated at least some of the time. And this goes way beyond just being a bit quiet or introverted. Over half of this generation actually reports that they have few or no friends they can rely on for real support. Studies are showing their reported loneliness is nearly double what older generations reported at the exact same age. And this isolation, it bleeds heavily into their romantic lives too. Roughly 44% of Gen Z men did not date at all in their teenage years. That's a pattern of romantic disconnect that is vastly higher than previous generations. Just think about what that means for social development. The fear here isn't just about being single for a little while. It's this deep, structural dread of lacking real relationships and deep friendships entirely. And the tricky part is, this isn't just a temporary phase. It builds into this really devastating psychological loop. When people experience extended isolation, they lose confidence, their social skills dull, and then suddenly, completely normal human connection feels incredibly intimidating, which of course just pushes them right back into further isolation. The macro consequences of this loop? They're already visible. Marriage rates are down, long-term relationships are down, and birth rates are collapsing. Entire family lines are stopping, simply because social disconnection makes finding a partner feel impossible. All right, pillar number 3, the permanent record and the digital archive.
Because this is the very first generation to grow up fully documented, it leads to a very specific, distinctly modern fear: getting canceled. Now, for the average person, this isn't some dramatic, highly publicized confrontation you see on the news. It's actually a quiet, untraceable social exclusion. It means people just stop responding to you. Invitations disappear. Opportunities quietly dry up without you ever being formally confronted about it. In our modern digital architecture, there is literally no reset button. A bad joke you made as a 15-year-old or a single message taken totally out of context can resurface years later and permanently follow you. Even if you mature, even if you completely change as a person, the digital record stays exactly the same. Because one mistake can instantly outweigh everything else about who you are, young people are constantly self-censoring. They delete posts, they stay silent, and they become incredibly cautious, filtered, and tense in digital spaces that were originally supposed to be, social. Which brings us to pillar number 4, algorithmic beauty standards. Physical appearance has always mattered, obviously. But today's platforms prioritize faces immediately. If we compare eras, the shift is just profound. In the past, feeling insecure about your looks was mostly situational and subjective. But present-day algorithmic platforms, they've turned attractiveness into cold, hard, public numbers. Your social value is quantified through likes, views, comments, and followers. People can see exactly how much attention others are getting and directly compare it to their own metrics. It makes appearance anxiety constant rather than situational. Because Gen Z spends way more time looking at highly attractive people than any previous generation, their baseline for what is normal becomes entirely warped. Feeds are just saturated with edited photos, perfect filters, and ideal body types. And then on dating apps, rejection is frequent, completely impersonal, and based almost entirely on photos. What happens is it leads to intense avoidance behaviors. Young people hesitate to date, they stop approaching others in real life, and they feel a constant self-consciousness in public. Looking unattractive doesn't feel like a temporary insecurity anymore, it feels like a permanent structural disadvantage.
And finally, we hit pillar number 5, the AI threat and replacement anxiety.
Automation is crashing the party at the exact moment this generation is attempting to build their careers. It forces this really chilling question that earlier generations rarely had to answer right at the start of their working lives. What makes you necessary? Imagine spending years taking on thousands in debt, learning creative or problem-solving skills, only to literally watch software companies release tools that can replicate that exact work faster, cheaper, and at an infinite scale.
The result of that is just profound, constant uncertainty. Even young people who are incredibly competent and hardworking do not feel secure, because usefulness is no longer permanent. Skills are expiring faster than they ever used to. It's an institutional shift where staying relevant feels like aiming at a rapidly moving target rather than walking a stable career path. When software can replicate your communication or your problem solving, you start to feel inherently disposable.
So let's pull all of this together, look at the actual architecture of their environment, and it all comes into sharp focus. We're looking at a generation that is priced out of basic housing, statistically more isolated than any generation before them, fully documented with absolutely no room for error, hyper-quantified by algorithms, and facing the constant threat of technological replaceability. Like we said at the top of this explainer, when you look at the actual structural shifts they're navigating, these fears make complete logical sense. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly critical question to chew on. How does a society function when its youngest members feel fundamentally locked out of its future? It's something we all really need to think about as these economic and structural shifts just continue to accelerate. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deep dive helped clarify the real facts and data behind the modern Gen Z experience.